So a minute on my tarot background. My family wasn't religious necessarily. I come from a Catholic family that never goes to church, for instance. Just say they're Catholic, but they don't really practice anything at home. And they really didn't believe in anything, but my father used to buy a paranormal magazine as a curiosity for entertainment to read on a Sunday. And one day, this magazine had a gift of a Marseille deck. I was 7 years old. I saw those cards and I said, those are mine. And I started laying them down on the floor, and I started connecting the pictures as a story. And I kept shuffling the cards and always recreating a new story depending on how the cards will be laying next to each other. And decades on, this is pretty much how I still read the tarot. It hasn't really changed much. And I went to art school also. I started 2 decks when I was in art school, but it didn't really develop to the end. But after a lot of world traveling, I went to more than 80 countries and meditated in lots of different temples and special landscapes and special spiritual places. I finally had the inspiration that I needed to actually do a full deck. But as I started working on the cards, it started coming out as something that was quite unexpected and not necessarily as a standard 78 cards deck that most of you will be familiar with. So I have laid here the 22 major arcana that I've done. That's the names of the cards, and the numbers pretty much follow the standard deck that you guys might know. And looking at the artwork for each one of the cards, the archetypes of the major arcana, where do they come from? Most of them, they're quite vague, like the magician. Who is the magician? Or the empress. Was that a specific empress in history that the archetype comes in and you have that in the card? I couldn't really find much background on the original archetypes of the cards. I mean, some are quite obvious, like the Tower card is connected to the Tower of Babel story. And that's quite clear on the imagery that the tower is being destroyed by a ray from the heavens, like by God. But most of the other major arcana, they're not really clear. So, meditating on the origin of the archetype of each one of the cards, I started connecting with different cultures on each one of them and finding different origins from different places from all over the world to try to depict this, what became really a global, collective, unconscious together in these 22 cards. So on the Fool, where you start your journey, you have the Orphic egg, or the origin of the world. The Magician, I chose the Vitruvian Man from Leonardo da Vinci, that shows someone, a human, connecting with its divine spark of harmonious human existence. And the High Priestess, Venus of Dusseldorf, as a connection of the primordial sacred feminine of the spirit, and so forth. You're going to find more details on the booklet, otherwise I'll take another extra hour just explaining each one of them. And the major arcana, I always saw them as a kind of a book of life. Because when you go from the Fool to the world, is this perfect transcendental journey of the evolution of the spirit of a human. You go through the awakening phase, you go through the receiving knowledge phase, you know, on perceiving that, how limited you are, and then you go to the transcendental connection with the universe until you get to the world. So from 0 to 22, you have, to 21, sorry, you have this perfect linear spiritual story of how a human can reach its biggest potential. But our lives is not necessarily like that. I think if you compare these cards to what happens in your real life, or these cards to phases that you really experienced in your life, I would say that my life has been pretty much Wheel of Fortune and which one? The Chariot, most of the time, up and down. My life has always been a lot of changes and very hard to settle in a place and always moving from house to house. And yesterday I was talking to a friend of mine and I asked him the same question. Do you think you had a linear, trajectory on your spiritual development? Or is just a few cards of the major arcana you identify your life with? And he said, oh, Jesus, I mean, his life, he said, is pretty much the Hanged Man and the Hermit. And he hasn't really moved on. Major arcana, as you can collate some cards together and make your own book of your own life with those cards. But not necessarily, ideally you have to experience all of them, but sadly that's not for all of us. And looking in this way, the original name of this deck was called Book of the Dead. If you look at ancient Egypt, Valley of the Kings, for instance, you're going to have a different Book of the Dead for each one of the pharaohs. They're not painted on the walls of the tombs. And in some of them, they can be quite long, because not only they have the protection spells painted on them, but also the achievements and the life history of each one of the pharaohs. So Ramses II, for instance, you're going to have very long hallways of, a lot of history depicted there of what he achieved in his lifetime. And some other pharaohs that didn't do so much. The galleries are a bit shorter, a bit smaller. So on this perspective of the major arcana and tarot, and looking at the Book of the Dead as the ancient Egyptians would collate the feats of your life, that was the original name of the deck, Book of the Dead Tarot. But I didn't want to necessarily attach too much of ancient Egyptian only in this deck, because even though you have the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and you're going to have Book of the Dead on Celtic lore and also in other traditions, it's still very attached to ancient Egypt. So again, as I was reaching this artwork that it's very much connected worldwide, I decided to zoom out and look at the big picture. And I saw the concept of the afterlife connect to these cards. Which takes me to the second stage. When I was a teen, I saw someone with a draft studying tarot, and they had the Qabalah. And all the tarot card names were in the Qabalah diagram, you see. And that was the first time I saw it, and it instantly came to my head, oh yeah, that's how you should read the tarot, right? So that's how eventually everybody reads the tarot. And I didn't really see that later on. Years on, I would see that as a study, or printed in books, or people using it as a diagram to do numerological analysis, or but not necessarily an actual reading of the physical cards on the Tree of Life itself. So, as this is becoming an afterlife device, an afterlife view device, and I'm now placing them in the Qabalah in the Tree of Life diagram, I have to leave it aside, the minor arcana. So you're not going to have the 56 usual cards for the minor arcana here. Usually when I read those cards, they connect very much to the mundane and to the daily life, and it's not really on the major phases of your life history. So I put aside the 56. It's not in this deck at this time, but maybe in a future edition they might come. But at the moment they don't belong here yet. And I developed 13 Afterlife cards instead. So when you're reading with the Tree of Life, so you have the tarot cards, they start on the top from the sequence. So you have 0 the Fool, 1 the Magician on the top, and they start going down until you have the World at the bottom. So we have 13 extra cards, which equivalates to the 10 sefirot and 3 veils that are part of the Tree of Life diagram. These 3 veils don't appear in all Kabbalistic or Jewish mysticism traditions, but I found it in quite a few sources and seem to be quite consistent on the fact that they divide this majestic representation of your connection to God in 3. So, sorry, in 4, because you have 3 veils. So you start from the more earthly realm, and there's 2 transitional realms until you reach the more subtle and more divine connection to God. I'm not necessarily a Kabbalistic specialist, Qabalah specialist, I'm not sure the word you say for that. But the Tree of Life diagram is an amazing illustration of how can you visualize your learning towards the divine. So once you have the card, the world, which is here, sorry I keep pointing in all directions here, I try to make it as visual as possible, but now I have 3 places to go through. Let's go here, let's go to the middle. So you start with the tarot cards on all the pathways, and this is going down because it's going to once you finish your human or earthly journey, you reach the world at the end, but then you connect with the earthly aspect of the Tree of Life, and then you go up towards the divine. So the 13 cards, they all have a very, how can I say, a kind of a linear journey. It starts from a transition with a ferryman, which is pretty much a very classic archetype of transition from life to the next subtle level. And you have metaphors for spiritual learning of the beggar and the fountain, and then spiritual locations and spiritual acknowledgement with the temple, collective consciousness, the understanding of time and being out of time with samsara, being one with everything in existence, with monad, being aware of a more of an even bigger picture with cosmic memory and the tree of knowledge, which is part of the Tree of Life. Reach the void, which is the abyss, and the hidden sefirot, which is where you reset your existence and go to rebirth, Genesis, to reach nirvana and start the cycle all over again with the Fool from here and go down towards the earthly realm and then go up again towards the divine. So the readings are, I have a few suggestions of readings, you know, the booklet is only 44 pages. I was quite brief on the booklet. I hope I can expand this with time. I had very good feedback, even from beginners, which I didn't think this tarot would be for beginners, but some people that never had a tarot before have been using it, they love it. So I give some examples of readings in the booklet. The basic things like ask a question or get 3 cards, you know, past, present, future. Or even at random, here. Yesterday I did a random, and but at random it just came out the Lover's, Death, and the Sun, and the cards that went there, I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's Samsara, the card Out of Time was one of them, which was quite nice. But there's also one reading that I suggest in the booklet, which is your afterlife reading, and you lay all the cards in it. Let's explore the 32 pathways of the Qabalah with the tarot in it, and plus the 3 veils, and lay all the 35 cards in it and see where they land. You know, use your intuition and the knowledge that you have already of some of the cards, and try to figure out why, you know, you have cosmic memory in the moon, and how does that associate with your life, and so forth.
How did you come to this idea of creating this kind of... I was late, so I'm 5 minutes. Really.
Which idea particularly? It's like 20 ideas here.
I mean, creating what inspired you at the beginning, and kind of how you went through it to creating this kind of tarot. Because this is just major arcanas, yeah?
It's major, and these 13 cards that I added extra that didn't exist. I mean, they don't normally publish those. It's something.
Okay.
Yeah, because they correlate to the Tree of Life elements, so they're very abstract.
But they differ from the big sefirot, like what they mean, like along the paths, or they just like mainly to do with how they relate. Are they from your mind, or they just you take it from some tradition? Other like
it was my own interpretation of something that is so figurative, like the tarot, that we've been following since the 1400s, which is, at the time, it was a very medieval, how can I say, symbology, because tarot as we know it, we first saw it in Italy in the 1400s, and it can be quite, you know, the symbols of that time, but it's very figurative and very two-dimensional, and the Tree of Life is very abstract. It's very hard to depict in images. I mean, each one of the sefirot, and to put an image to it. So I did my own interpretation of something in between. So if I had to choose an element that goes between life and your spiritual passing, that can also fit with the earthly aspect of the Tree of Life. The ferryman is an archetype that you can find in many different cultures. So yeah, so after a lot of meditation with it, it felt really right that he belonged there. And then the beggar and the fountain as other symbols that could be as abstract as the Tree of Life itself, but also gives a figurative imagery that you can put in a card and work on this transitional step here. And then the temple, collective consciousness, the wheel of time, but is the card Out of Time, which is samsara, the unity with everything, monad, and the others. I don't know. Did you?
Like beauty, sefirot.
Yes. Yes. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Because when you ask how did I come up with it, that's a very long answer. I try to be as brief as possible, but I can't repeat everything I already said. Tell me.
I've got a question. So you use the Qabalah. Can you explain why you're mixing a few things together?
I am mixing everything.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And that's part of when I was searching for the archetypes of the cards, and I couldn't find a substantial origin of each of archetypes of each one of the cards, apart from the Tower and maybe another exception, but so death, I put a pharaoh in here, an ancient Egyptian symbol, as a representation of the beauty of death, that it can be beautiful somehow. Most decks you're going to find a skeleton. And it's lovely, but maybe we can, there's so many different ways of seeing a death. You don't always have to see it like that. Temperance, I did a Chinese Kuan Yin that she does compassion, but is also the balance of the humors. The Hangman is Nordic, is Odin, because he was hanging upside down for 3 days, and that's how he had the revelation of the runes. So to find an original archetype that had a real culture around it and a real worship at some point in the history of the world, so I could give life and an actual, you know, origin story for each one of the major arcana that they didn't have before. Yes, so Samsara is Sanskrit, but it's just one of the aspects. The Tree of Knowledge, I put Mesopotamian symbol. The tower, my tower is very special.
So you drew it?
Yes, I did all this. Yeah. And the tower, I have Kali from Hinduism. Because every time I see the tower, there's so many aspects to it, but the main phrase that always sticks with me is slaying of the ego. And Kali is the best one for that. But I did an extra fusion on it. I actually painted her with the face of the Holy Mary and with a Christian heart, because that's the thing, people get very attached to the pictures, and sometimes they get scared of pictures without really looking beyond looking the actual meaning or the actual worship of the culture of the picture. Like they see the card of death with the skeleton, and people freak out, and they use that as cliche in many movies, right, as well. And the tower as well, a lot of people get scared with it. Or when they see the Kali image, that she's got the tongue out and she's slaying all the heads and there's blood everywhere and London's just collecting all those skulls. A lot of people freak out as well with it. So the act of slaying of the ego is an act of compassion, is an act of love. And that's my take on the tower. But yeah, you're going to find all cultures, ancient Greece, European, Western alchemy, there's Hinduism again, there's Chinese again, Tibetan Buddhism.
Many cultures.
Yeah.
So I have a follow-up question.
Yes.
If we've got a multicultural tarot deck, which afterlife?
It's your afterlife.
It's any. Yeah.
It's it can be a compilation of all your lives across, your spiritual existence, from the future, from the past, and your current life. And that's why this is a cycle that just keeps, you start reading the cards as tarot tokens downwards, but when you go working with the sefirot, you go upwards, and it's a cycle that keeps going. And you can just
could be anything.
Read for any lives you want.
Samadhi, could be the next life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How can you break this cycle?
Oh.
I mean, how can you aspire? I mean, in that way, can it be as a tool for transcending? So it's like not just going back and forward.
It could. It could, because it's how you use it with your intuition, what comes up in the reading and what you manage to read with it. And even if you don't, the reason why I also printed this, it's also for studying, because a lot of people like to use the Tree of Life to study with the tarot, and the size it has, you can use it with any other cards. This is the Rider-Waite Pamela Coleman-Smith deck, or the Alessia Crowley one. So any other tarot you have at home, you can just place it there and use it as a study of the Tree of Life and the tarot of your choice. Because that's missing. I always wanted something like this to read cards, and I couldn't find one. Any other questions? Yeah, go on.
Could you give a quick demonstration?
On what?
Well,
Quick reading.
a quick reading, like
Yeah.
1 or 2 cards.
Oh,
I'm ready for you.
I don't
Well,
know. How
quick
can I
reading
lay
for
them
some.
out down?
Anyone. Or just something.
Yeah.
Right. I'm gonna have to improvise here because the only disadvantage of this deck is that you need, or this cloth at least, you need a big place to lay it. Not everybody has a large dining table for this, but it was the only solution that I could find to print something that could fit any tarot size. I mean, any of the standard tarot size. What I can do is, I laid these cards already here. So I laid these cards here just to show you the connection of the sefirot and the cards I created for those placements. And that's why they're there on sellotape. What we can do is, oh, thank you. Actually, you just shuffle this, and we'll pick 3 cards, and I'll just put them at random, because we won't be able to do the reading of 35 cards with this time. But
Do you read them reversed?
doesn't matter. I'll read anything you give me.
Okay.
Right, thank you. Did I take off the first card? Yes, I did. Oh, actually, pick 3. You do. Actually, do you want to hold the whole thing and just give me 3 cards? It's like a magic trick now. I have to guess which ones they are. I'm joking. I can't do that.
It is a full moon first thing tomorrow morning.
I saw. Thank you. Right. This one had cards already, so how can I do this at random? Let's get the Magician, the Hermit, and Beauty. You said Beauty, didn't you? So, first card, Magician. We have the Fountain in the Magician. And
So you just pick for yourself?
I just picked at random now, the first thing that came to my eye, because I can't really do it on a table at the moment. So I'm just improvising. Nirvana, card 34 is the last card in the Hermit. And oh, how funny! We have the Lovers in Beauty, which is 6 and 6. Oh, this is very nice.
Oh, do tell.
Related to,
Yes.
yes, to 9 foundation. But we have them. We have it. Sorry, in the Magician. I would say that as a magician is the start of your esoteric journey somehow, following this pathway anyway. You feel like there's a lot of knowledge that, you know, it's right there and you can feel it, and it's so close to your reach, but at the same time it's just so grand and it's just so vast that it's quite difficult to get a grasp of it. But it is like there's this ginormous treasure trove of not to say cosmic knowledge, but or Akashic records. It's quite abstract. Of content that it's very close to you, but it's in to have a translation to our realm. There's still a little step to it. So, but you're tapping into it and you're working on it. And Nirvana on the Hermit. I'll go very literal on those and say maybe you like to do retreats and go to retreats a lot. I'll go this is very like literal, you know, go to because you have like the last card of your most high connection with God and the Hermit, so you're already like on the pathway, right? So you're ready on that direction, you know where you have to go, you just have to keep working on it.
Can you tell us where you're going?
No.
It's okay.
Okay.
I don't know about the most.
And the Lovers in Beauty.
It doesn't. That's how it should be.
It's very auspicious, and I would just say that regardless of which pathway you choose, there is a very harmonious spiritual connection with you and around you, and even although it can feel, can I say, difficult at times because it's very big.
Overwhelming.
Sorry?
Overwhelming.
Yes, overwhelming. There you go.
Overwhelming.
But you will always find, you're always going to find the right way to go. You know, it is always a righteous path.
In the center.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
As a reader, do you, what do you think this Tree of Life reading brings to a tarot reader? You know, what information do you think you could get from this that you wouldn't normally get from any other type of reading? You know, as in your experience as a tarot reader, what have you found?
Well, I'm quite pleased to finally have the practical tool to do the Tree of Life connection. That's one. But as a reading, like on the actual content that comes in the reading, sometimes it does blow my mind actually when I do this, and when my rational brain, when I'm starting working on this, my rational brain is like, this can't be right, it's a bit too big, a bit too big like idea wise. But when I start placing the cards and they actually match, they make sense where they fall, and it's quite easy, at least for me, to make an interpretation of where each card lands, and there's a little reward at the end that I actually can make this extra connection of something more outwardly. Nothing wrong with the other sets, with the standard sets that has, you know, the 56 Minor Arcana and everything. I use them a lot, especially, you know, when sometimes I want to ask questions about my daily life, about work, or, you know, house refurbishment and things like that. And this is where I go to, and I think they're brilliant. And although they can do very deep psychotherapy work as well, but yeah, this is just one more aspect to the tarot, and hopefully opens up a nice a door that we've been waiting to have a device that does that. Anything else? Any other questions when we're done, time-wise?
So reading is normally 13 cards placed on that map.
No, sorry. No, I'm in the wrong place again. You can read it any kind of any number of cards that you want. I suggested some readings on the booklet, like the basic 3 cards, past, future, present, or just a question reading as well. And sometimes you can do the full set. You can put all the 35 cards on the cloth and see where they land. But you can create your own readings as well. I mean, like this was like improvised 3 cards just to keep it short. But I didn't necessarily do past, present, future. So it's up to what your curiosity, your spiritual curiosity tells you to do.
How did you decide the positions of those 3 cards?
It was the first place I saw. But it was very improvised, because this should be on the table really. But you wouldn't be able to get it on the camera if I put this on the table, and I don't think we have a table big enough to lay this down and do a proper reading.
Let's try it at home.
Yeah. So we close the session.
Yeah. But thank you so much, Ever, for
Oh.
taking the time.
Thank you.
And we do have plenty